Hello and welcome back to the Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis podcast. This is the podcast for those wanting to navigate the secular world with faith-based values. My name is Rigel.
And I am Travis, and we are your hosts.
Your support keeps this podcast going, so thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. Travis, would you mind telling our audience what today's episode is going to be about?
Yeah, absolutely. So today we're joined by our friend Braden. He's been a guest on the show before, and today he's joining us to talk about the intersect of faith and finance. Specifically, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Chartered Financial Analyst, or CFA program. Braden, like me, completed the exams for the CFA program. He and I have both taught people that are interested in becoming CFA charter holders and passing the exams. Rigel himself has participated in and wrote some of the exams, and we're going to be talking about the program, the finance profession, the world of finance, which affects all of us, and how we navigate it from a faith-based perspective. Braden, for those who don't know, originally from Calgary, he grew up largely in Winnipeg, went to the University of Alberta in the phys ed program, ended up, however, transferring and completing a degree in general studies through Calgary's Catholic University, St. Mary's University, went on to do an education degree, after which he realized that he had a love for finance, and so he pursued the CFA program himself. That's actually where him and I first crossed paths back in, I think, 2017. He himself was baptized and confirmed in the Catholic Church in 2016, and today he, conducts his professional life at the intersect of education and finance, with very much a focus on his faith. And so we're going to chat with him a little bit about that. And I think this will be an interesting conversation, especially for those people who are either finance professionals, are interested in being finance professionals, and wondering how that can be done successfully while also being a professing and committed Christian. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Before we get into it, as we always do, I'm going to start with a passage from someone much wiser, smarter, and better than we are that will frame the conversation a little bit. So today we're going to look at a writing from Pope Benedict.to. He released his papal encyclical Caritas in Veritate on June 29th, 2009. This was the third and final of his papal encyclicals, and it was the only one that was a social encyclical. And in English, the title means Charity in Truth. And in that encyclical, Pope Benedict XVI says as follows: "Today, we hear much talk of ethics in the world of economy, finance, and business. Research centers and seminars in business ethics are on the rise, and the system of ethical certification is spreading throughout the developed world as part of the movement of ideas associated with the responsibilities of business towards society. Banks are proposing ethical accounts and investment funds. Ethical financing is being developed, especially through microcredit, and more generally, microfinance. These processes are praiseworthy and deserve much support. Their positive effects are also being felt in the less developed areas of the world. It would be advisable, however, to develop a sound criterion of discernment, since the adjective ethical can be abused. When the word is used generically, it can lend itself to any number of interpretations, even to the point where it includes decisions and choices contrary to justice and authentic human welfare." So to start the conversation, maybe what we'll do, if Braden, if you don't mind, can you maybe give our listeners who have no idea what the CFA program is or why they should care about it all, maybe just sort of speak to what the CFA program is and what it is that attracted you to it, without a background in finance or investing specifically.
Sure. So the Chartered Financial Analyst program, or the CFA, is a credentialing program that is, highly coveted within the finance industry. It focuses on asset valuation and investment decisions, and is held by people with many different positions in the finance industry, like research analysts, investment management, asset management, portfolio management, investment banking. Lots of people within the industry value this credential, this charter. What brought me to it? I have friends who work in finance, who are friends more so from football, that I saw them work very, very hard to attain the charter. And when I started to voice to them that I had this newly developed passion for finance and interest in finance, they said to me, maybe you should consider looking at this program. And it was more so because I just had this desire to learn. That's something that is innate in me, is this a desire to understand. So when I was coming to the faith, I had this desire to understand, what is this greater purpose, this truth that I feel, that I know to be there. And, with finance, I had this desire to understand how the secular world worked. So I was, again, coming toward this joy of learning about finance. And at the same time, I was kind of struggling with teaching. I was starting to think maybe teaching wasn't the right profession for me, because I didn't always have this joy for being up at the front of the classroom. I am a more introverted person, and I was struggling initially with that, and also with this. What I find when you're in the classroom, when you're in schools, you're very much, it's a microcosm of society at large, right? You're very much aware of the challenges of the day. And I didn't really, I think, initially appreciate my role and my place in all of that. So again, I was kind of questioning if teaching was right for me, or if I wanted to try and pursue a different career. And again, this interest in finance. And I voiced this to my friends, and they said, you know what, if you want to potentially switch careers, or if you're just interested in learning, there's no waste when it comes to education, right? If I wanted to pursue it and didn't go anywhere in terms of a career, I still have everything that I've learned, right? So that's what drew me to it. And now I spend some of my limited free time trying to help others in their pursuit of the charter as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Braden. And I'll maybe speak, and then Rigel can as well, a little bit of my own experience with the CFA program. My pursuit of it was far less noble than Braden's was. So I also love to learn. And I'm a nerd, and I'll probably be in school in one way, shape, or form until the day I die, much to my wife's chagrin. But that is not why I pursued the CFA. It was purely, I won't say purely ego driven for me. It was purely monetary, though. When I finished my MBA, I majored in finance, and then I knew that I wanted to make a career change from what I was doing, and I had been doing for a long time because I worked in the advertising industry. So I finished my MBA, majored in finance, had found a profound interest in it, like I think you did, Braden, an interest in the field of finance specifically, and how it's kind of the language of business in a lot of ways. At the end of the day, if you aren't using numerical terms, it's hard to quantify whether business is successful or not, to what extent businesses are successful, et cetera, et cetera. And so there was something about that I had always maybe been interested in, but never really pursued. And so when I finished the MBA, I started applying for jobs, and I kept seeing this 3-letter acronym show up in all the job postings: CFA, 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 CFA. And I'm like, what the heck is that? Is that an accounting designation? So I came to learn more about it and realized that it was a self-study program. It is open to most people. I think it's changed since I started, but at the time, all you needed was a bachelor's degree. It didn't need to be in any subject. You just had to have a bachelor's degree from an accredited university, and you could do the self-study program. And it's kind of become the gold standard, as it were, in the field of finance, if you want to be a finance professional. And so I started studying it in 2015, shortly after I finished my MBA. There's 3 exams at the time. I think the fastest you could complete the program was in 18 months, theoretically, because of the timing of the exams. I was very, very fortunate that I got through the program as quickly as possible. I chalk that up to luck more than anything. I don't think my study habits were actually that good. I think I just got lucky, and the weighting of the exams and stuff worked in my favor. But I got the CFA charter in 2017. I was awarded it, and then I held it for the last 6 years. And just this year, I've allowed it to expire because I'm no longer working in finance currently. And so it does me no good to pay the fees for the thing that no one cares about in the work I'm doing today. But I did also, like Braden, teach it for a couple years, taught people that were pursuing the credential as well. And it's the gold standard. Like I said, it's probably going to be the gold standard for many years to come. And so if you're someone that's interested in working in finance today, I think the 3 of us here would all concur that this is not a bad thing to pursue. It's definitely not the only thing that you can do to build a career in finance. And I'll let you, Rigel, jump in here and speak to that. But it is certainly the gold standard, and they do a good job of maintaining the reputation of the CFA program as the thing to pursue if you want to work in this industry.
Yeah, I think, and just to give some background, I've passed level 1 of the CFA. I've failed level 2. I'm at a point now where I'm like deciding whether or not I actually want to keep going with the CFA or just decide to, not go down that route anymore and pursue other avenues. Um, Reason for me specifically was just because the way the CFA was structured in the past, it was heavily weighted towards portfolio management, especially as you go, you get to level 3 and stuff, and it's heavily weighted for portfolio management. And so if that's not your desired outcome, how much value is there? Like, I'm sure all of us can resonate with the fact that as soon as the exam is over, you step out the door and you forget half the things that you learned. There's a ton of formulas that are completely irrelevant to the field that you're working in, which you have to memorize because, hey, there's no formula booklet. And so it seems like a lot of time for not necessarily equivalent results, or at least, the same magnitude of results as the time you put in. It also just rings kind of weird for me that it's called the Chartered Financial Analyst, where, if you look at a financial analyst job description, they're usually looking for CPAs. And so I always found that kind of weird. Most people that do the CFAs are either going to wealth management or they're going to capital markets. And, same as Travis, I think the reason I went into the CFA was purely to make myself stand out. Just like every other finance grad, I was like, I'm going to go into investment banking. That's going to be the thing that I do, without knowing a thing about investment banking itself. And I was at SAIT for my bachelor's, and there were a bunch of CFA charter holders there as teachers, which meant that there were also a lot of scholarships being given to SAIT students. Thankfully, I had a degree that I had already completed prior to the second degree. And so after my first year in the summer, I wrote CFA level 1, managed to pass that. And I was like, oh, okay, this is great. But all it really did for me was open doors, which is great. And I'm super thankful for that. But going forward in the direction that I want to go in my career, I'm not sure that the CFA necessarily has a part to play. I think it may have played its part already, and how I go forward from here is a different path.
Awesome. Thanks, Rigel. Braden, I'm curious for you, because you came into the CFA program with an interest in finance, but maybe not a fully well-formulated interest, and you haven't made the switch to work as a finance professional, and you might never do so. And whereas for me, I desperately wanted to work in finance, and then I did, and I actually hated it, and I stuck it out. I left multiple jobs, but I actually really didn't like working in finance, which is this thing that my ego compelled me to pursue desperately, as if I was going to be happy doing it, and then I wasn't. And so I've left the finance profession, but there are a lot of things about it that I really did enjoy, a lot of interesting people, and there is some awesome work that is done in the industry. What was it for you that compelled you to finish the program, but you haven't pursued making a full career change into the finance profession? What is it that's kept you as an educator primarily, as opposed to going all out to try to make a career change into the field of finance, now that you've done the steps that give you the chance, if you worked in the industry, to be a CFA charter holder?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one that I've wrestled with myself. So when I was going through level 2, so just for means of background, in 2018, I completed level 1. In 2019, I completed level 2. And then 2020 was COVID. And then 2021, I completed level 3. When I was going through level 2, I was very much gung-ho about trying to get into the finance industry. And I was throwing out applications for different positions, but I only got a little bit of interest, not a lot. And I was constantly wrestling with, these positions that I was applying for. Were they really something that I like saw myself doing? Were they really something that I thought aligned with who I am and my strengths and what I could, see myself doing and provide for a firm? And a lot of it obviously was more entry level kind of positions. And what I do know of the industry, again, a lot of it is through conversation with others, and I've done I've done some interviewing, and I've done a lot of research, and I'm drawn to it because of, again, the role that it plays in society as a whole, like the opportunity to be so involved in, and it's very stimulating. intellectually, and like that's something that I value. But the idea of, do I get to provide as great of a value to society as I do as an educator? I don't really know if that would be the case. And also, I've wrestled a bit with, is this God's plan for me, or is this my plan for me? And it's been a bit of a battle. I have, since completing level 3, I have applied for a couple of positions, but they were a bit of a reach, and they were things that I thought, this would be really exciting and a great opportunity. And a lot of them were positions where there seemed to be some, humility is not the right word, but some recognition of a desire to grow and learn and to foster that. And I value that. So there was a couple positions where I saw that, and I was like, even if it is an entry level or a lower level position, it could still be a great opportunity for me. But again, is it God's plan for me, or is it my plan for me? And that's kind of what I keep coming back to.
That's great distinction, and I've wrestled personally with that exact thing. And by way of background for me a little bit, in 2020, I was supposed to start a doctorate program in business and finance at the same university I did my MBA in, and I was really excited about it for a time. And then it was during COVID. There were some material changes in my life that made me realize that it probably wasn't the right time. And then I started to question exactly what you're talking about, which is, what are my motivations for doing this? And are they consistent with me at the time gradually but surely coming back to my faith that I had long abandoned? And so I decided not to pursue the doctorate program. I was going to focus specifically, my research was going to be specifically in the space of investment management. And I found my way to do a theology degree. And so I'm working my way right now through a theology degree. And so I know for me that I've actually found that I find the study of theology, specifically the history of the church, philosophy and stuff, far more intellectually demanding than I ever expected it to be, and actually more so than finance, which I never would have guessed. I thought finance was kind of like this, it's very mathematics based, it's scientific in some respects, but it's also the intersect of like the social sciences and the hard sciences, because it's math and then like relationships and everything coming together. And so I just thought that this is like the creme de la creme of intellectual pursuits. And I don't believe that anymore. I've actually found the study of theology much more demanding and difficult, in all honesty. Braden, for you, do you find finance more difficult to study, less difficult to study, just different than the other things you've studied? And what are the things about it that you enjoy studying that resonate with you?
That's a really good question. I enjoy studying finance. I have enjoyed studying finance for the last 4 years, 5 years now. Yeah. I don't find it as challenging, but like to be honest, I didn't have to derive the Black-Scholes Merton. I just had to learn it and try to understand it. Right. So, there are, I think, difficult aspects definitely within finance, and things that I may not even at this point understand fully. I have, I think, a decent understanding. I think that's kind of required in order to complete the program. But as Rajal said, I'm sure I've lost some of it already. Studying theology and philosophy, I hear where you're coming from. I mean, there's just such a richness within that material, and such a value that is like incontrovertible. I think like you studying what it is to be human, and what is justice, and what does it mean to be moral and ethical, and it's, yeah, I mean, these are questions that people have grappled with for all of existence, right? And I mean, sure, you can say some aspects of finance date back a very long time to, ancient Babylon or whatnot. But I mean, the study of what it is to be human and what it is to be good, I think there's so much within that. So yeah, I can appreciate where you're coming from with that. I don't know. To say what do I enjoy learning most, I enjoy learning. I enjoy coming to understand things that I didn't understand previously, right? So in learning, biology, biochemistry, organic chemistry, this kind of stuff it's brilliant. It's a lot of fun. It's interesting. coming to learn how to calculate an MPV or Gordon growth model, all this kind of stuff. Like, yeah, that's great. It's fun. It's interesting. But who is God? That's a big question.
And I think my wife would fiercely disagree with you about learning the Gordon growth model being interesting. She would draw a line in the sand at that if her own studies of the finance, limited as they are any indication. Rigel, for you, maybe curious in terms of, and this I'll ask you first, Rigel, and then I really want Braden's thoughts as well. Finance gets a bad reputation, and I would argue deservedly so for most people. And I say that having worked as an investment manager, having done the CFA program, having taught the CFA program, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think finance deservedly gets a bad reputation, not more so than maybe other professions or other industries, but it has a reputation. And maybe this is a product of, we live in a post-financial crisis world, the three of us. The financial crisis was sort of just starting when I finished university and everything. And so maybe it would have been different if it was 30 years ago or 40 years ago. But I think for the most part, the average person in our society doesn't necessarily have a great view of what it is to be a finance professional. And some would even outright say you can't be a person of faith and be a finance professional. And while I would disagree with that, I absolutely sympathize with that sentiment. And I would probably at times in my life have made the exact same statement. Rigel, I'm curious your thoughts on that, about the intersect, if possible, of faith and finance. And then same question to you, Braden, after Rigel gives us his take.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you. It's not easy to be in finance and live your faith properly, because a lot of the time when you work in finance, the money that you manage is not yours. So regardless of your values, the work that you're asked to do is not necessarily the way that you would do it if the money was yours. Over time, I've also just become super jaded by the finance industry. Like, if ever I have a student come to me super excited about finance and just ready to take the industry on, I'll encourage them to go and watch The Big Short. Like, a lot of things have been done wrong. It just seems a lot of the time like the finance industry has turned our whole economic system into a house of cards. And most people don't even understand basic personal finance, let alone options and futures and forwards. Like, since when did we need those? Why? We started with subsistence farming, and suddenly we're dealing with synthetic shares. It's just such a long way that we've come, and for good reason at some points. But it's also become just super complicated and just an industry that doesn't really serve the average person well, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Lots of times, my own cynicism about finance is that in my experience, a lot of it has seemed to become in the last 30, 40 years. I know it wasn't always this way. Stock exchanges basically didn't exist really until, with the last 100 years or so. And so this is relatively new in the scope of human history, but I think it's gotten to the point where a lot of finance is finance for the sake of finance, rather than having any connection whatsoever with what is in fact good for our economy and, more importantly and holistically, our society. And as Christians, that's in fact what we have to care about the most. And there's a big gap, I think, between the finance profession and what is good for society. And I'm not sure that the gap isn't getting wider. And your recommendation, Rigel, of The Big Short is spot on. Yeah, it's a Hollywood movie based upon the book. The book is awesome too, but it's based on truth and true events that actually happened, and they're real. They're not spectacular. It's a spectacular representation of what was truthfully happening in our economy at the expense of the average person, which is interesting and really unfortunate. Braden, maybe your thoughts on being a person of faith and working in finance. How possible is that? How difficult is that? What are your thoughts?
Well, first, I'd like to make a reference to another movie. I think The Big Short, it's eye-opening for sure. Quite the star-studded cast for that one. But Margin Call, there was a moment in Margin Call that really stuck with me where, they're talking about how like they've realized the risk that they're exposed to, and they have to offload their books, and they're going to have to offload them onto like unsuspecting other banks and the public essentially. And when the like main character has to grapple with that fact, and those above him just like sell it all anyways, right? Like that we have to look out for ourselves. That obviously that moment stuck in my head because it's like it's directly in conflict with what it means to live virtuously and to be charitable and think of others and love others. That you don't do that to those that you love. Just passing off the risk onto others who are unawares. When it comes to the history of stock markets and futures and forwards, I think like I see value in it. But again, I understand where these things seem incompatible with the Catholic faith. I think in essence, the nature of like forward contracts, like to offload risk on behalf of a farmer. Or not to offload risk, to hedge risk on for a farmer trying to hedge their risk in terms of their crops or their cattle or what have you. Like I see the logic in that. I think that makes sense. But then when you get into things like securitization and these collateralized debt obligations and stuff like this, where it's like, who is this serving? What is the intent behind it? Is the intent to stay afloat? Is the intent to again place this risk on those who don't really understand it? Because if that's the intention behind it, then it is not just and it is dishonest, right? And there's evil in that. So again, I think like I'm constantly like I've had many conversations with, again, my friend Father Cristino about are these things completely incompatible? Like is it usurious to charge interest on a loan? Is that or is that just basic time value of money? Like where do these things can they coexist? And where do we draw a line on that? And it's something that I've struggled with a bit. I mean, in my personal opinion and what I've come to believe, I don't necessarily think that, and again, this is just personal opinion, and I'm more than willing to hear what you guys have to say on this, but I don't really think that charging interest is in and of itself a bad thing. I think that the history of charging interest, it stemmed back to livestock and things that were naturally going to bear offspring and be able to provide additional return. But anyways, I don't necessarily think that it's that is the problem. I think again, it's exploitation that's the problem, right? It's when you're taking advantage of others and not necessarily being honest and charitable in your interactions with others. So yeah, I don't know if that necessarily answered the question, but that's kind of what comes to mind when I think about it.
I think that's a great point because I mean that's true for so many professions, right? Like there's utility in the profession itself. Take sales as an example, or marketing. Done well, what you're doing is serving people's needs. You deliver a product that they want or need, but done poorly, it's just greed compounded, and it's absolutely just selling anything you can to anyone you can find. And so there's a right way and a wrong way to do everything. Travis, I know you had a comment, but I have a question for both of you after.
Awesome. Yeah. You're spot on, Rigel. We're talking today about finance, but this applies equally to any industry. And I think it's, we have a tendency in our culture at large, and maybe it's always been this way. Maybe this is a human characteristic for one reason or another, that we really love black and white. And we strive for black and white, and we have no time whatsoever, seemingly, in our Twitter, what's it called now, X, formerly Twitter culture, where if you can't explain it in one sentence, it must be not true, which is obviously ridiculous, but that seems to be the way we operate. And I think that the truth is far more nuanced than the average person has time to understand. And so I think what Braden, you've highlighted a great point, and even the number of times, myself probably being guilty of this, the number of times I hear people make some reference to money being evil, as if that's what Jesus said and as recorded in the Gospels, when in fact it's the love of money that is the root of all evil. And those are vastly different things. Money is just a tool, like it's an object, it's a means of exchange. It's just like a way to quantify the exchange of things that people need and want. It's the love of money that makes money an idol. But the love of anything other than God and people and showing those loves, that too makes that thing an idol. And so obviously the love of money is evil, because making an idol of anything is evil and it's against the gospel. But I think we very easily mistake that. And so the assumption becomes that people who work in finance probably have a love of money. That's the assumption. That might not be true. Some people, and I hope that most of the time I spent in finance, I never loved money. I was probably too comfortable with it, and I spent too much time thinking about it, and I will admit that. But I don't think I ever loved money necessarily, and I think it's very possible to work in finance and not have a love for this thing and not make it an idol and serve the common good, and to do so with love as we're all called to. That doesn't mean it's easy. And I think one observation I would have, and this is true of any profession, but I speak specifically of finance here because it's what we all probably know best. I think the reality of conflicts of interest, if you're managing someone else's money, and if they've asked something of you, or they want something, or they just have an expectation that you will do something, and that is in fundamental conflict with what you know to be right and true. And that happens every day in the finance industry, and it could never be otherwise. And anyone that thinks it could is they're just lying, because it's impossible. Because at some point, if you are in any semblance of a culture that has any semblance of diversity, especially in the West today, where we have a confluence of worldviews and religious views and non-religious views, people's values are not going to align. And you as a finance professional, if you're responsible for making decisions about other people's money, I don't know that it's enough to be like, well, this decision isn't what I would do, but it's best for them. It's like, but you are the one making the decision. And that puts you in a difficult situation. And I'm not saying those situations are difficult to navigate, but I'm doing my moral theology class right now at St. Augustine Seminary. And it's made me realize how much thought is required for any one of these individual decisions, whether or not it is in fact a morally valid decision. And, pleading ignorance or being like, well, I'm only doing it for someone else, I can guarantee you is an automatic, that's an immoral decision 100% of the time. We don't get to make that argument as Christians. So I think that's something that is tough for individual people in the finance profession trying to navigate their profession and their faith. Rigel, you had a question though.
Yeah, it actually ties back to what you're talking about, this conflict of interest, and this question stems from that, because we were in our very first meeting, Travis, we were talking about conflicts of interest in the workplace and stuff like that. So, as we know, the CFA has an ethics section. And like the question I have for both of you is, how relevant are those ethics that are taught theoretically versus how practical are they in the actual workplace when working in finance?
You go first, Braden.
Well, that's a good question. It's a hard one for me to answer, honestly, because I've never been in a position where I'm making investment decisions on behalf of others. But before doing the CFA, I had taken courses in ethics, and I always kind of thought it was funny that this subject area in the CFA program is titled ethics, but there's no discussion of Kant or of Aristotle or any of this, right? And I think I see the connection, and they do obviously get into looking out for those that you invest or making these decisions on behalf of, and making sure that the investments are suitable and that any potential conflicts are disclosed. And I think that they seem to me to be well thought out and practical, but I don't think they ever really get at the heart of what it means to be ethical. So that's kind of, I guess, my point, my perspective on it.
I think you nailed an element of what would have been my answer there, Braden, is that it seems, and for those who aren't familiar with the CFA program, it's basically broken up into different subject areas that at each level of exams has a different weighting. But at each level, the ethics component is a material part of the exam, and so you do have to know these ethical guidelines very, very well. And they aren't easy. In fairness to the CFA program creators, they do create scenarios that the questions are based upon that are very difficult. Like the average person trying to make a decision, like they paint a picture of in the exam questions, would really struggle to know what is in fact the right thing to do from a purely financial perspective. That's now what I think, Braden, you're highlighting is there seems to be no indication that ethics has to be based on something, right? Like we don't all agree on what is good and right. Like we don't, and we know that. Like talk to anyone about anything remotely controversial, and you will get vastly different views on what is right and good. The only way to resolve those scenarios is to have what we think is right or good come from something. Now, as Christians, we know that, okay, what is right and what is true and what is good comes from God as revealed to us in one way, shape, or form, chiefly in Scripture. And for Catholics, we hold to the interpretation of Scripture by the magisterium or the church, and also in the church's tradition. That is how we know what teachings we should use to navigate these difficult situations that we all face in life. The CFA program, and I don't know how else they would do it, but they just like, this is what's right. This is what's good. And we're not going to tell you why. And we've probably never even thought about it. It's probably just because it's what we can explain without explaining. And there's some fundamental disconnect between reality and that scenario. And so I think in terms of what the ethics of the CFA program is based upon, they might just be pandering to the lowest common denominator. Because I don't think anyone would say lying is good. I don't think anyone would actually say that. People will still lie, but I don't think they'd be like, this is the best thing to do in this scenario. So we can all sort of agree that telling the truth is the right thing. Yes, we all agree on that. But then it gets into, okay, then what is truth? And what does that mean? And those are the hard questions that we don't get into in the CFA program. And maybe we never could. But I think if, like Braden, what you hinted at is like, there's a history of thought behind this. And it goes back thousands of years, probably from the earliest human beings would have thought about what is good, what is right. And that has played out through history. And to not touch on those things at all in a program that's teaching professional ethics effectively, it seems to me a little short-sighted or a little naive. I don't know. That's my view, but that I feel that that's right.
I remember when I started to read, actually I started with the ethics section when I first started the level 1 material. And I remember the justification that I came across, it still stands out to me, was we want people to have trust in the finance industry, right? We want them to have trust in the capital markets. So that's why we need to behave ethically, not because, this is what is good and this is what is true. And, we should seek out the golden mean and, be prudent and I found that interesting. But
yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe one final question that'll take a couple of minutes to unwrap, but for both of you guys, if you could each choose one positive thing about finance as a force in the world and one negative thing, and if you can sort of tie it to your faith. So from a general Catholic general Christian or specifically Catholic worldview, what do you think finance can and should do that's good in the world? And what do you think it is doing or has done that is not good in the world that we need to care about as Christians?
So I think if I'll take that first, I think that one thing that the financial markets, and I struggle to separate the financial markets and capitalism. I guess like they are very closely intertwined. But I think one positive thing is well, maybe two positive things if that's okay. One is that it opens up the doors. It allows for a freer movement or allocation of capital to different uses for that capital. And now the question about what society values and wants that capital to be allocated toward, that is a question in and of itself. But I think the fact that it enables that is positive, right? It just comes down to what is it being used for. And I also think that inherently it aligns more than other potential, schools of economics, or I think it aligns more with the natural freedom that the Catholic Church believes we are entitled to as children of God. So, I think that would be, I guess, a pro that I believe in very strongly. And then a negative, I think that because of that freedom, we are still susceptible to making the wrong choices. And if we, begin to use people as a means to an end, our own ends, then we are obviously not behaving virtuously or respecting the dignity of one another, and that obviously goes directly against the teaching of Christ and the Church.
Yeah, I think my sentiments are kind of similar to Braden's. It's almost not the finance system itself. I think it just comes down to how it's utilized. I think everything in finance has some kind of utility, and used well, it's a great tool for everyone. Let's take leverage as a good example. You can borrow money to buy a home that you wouldn't otherwise be able to afford, which can be a great thing. But at the same time, like if you warp that same sentiment or that same tool with greed or unrealistic expectations, or without some level of moderation, it can be a very bad thing. And I think we do a disservice to the general public by not giving enough education on how finance works. Like most people are pretty ignorant to financial concepts, and so they over leverage, or they jump into a venture without really fully understanding it. They invest without understanding what that investment actually means or what that company actually even does. So the stock market's another great example. You can build wealth, or at least preserve wealth, protect yourself from inflation and everything if you invest. But at the same time, you can put all your money into penny stocks because of greed, hoping that it'll go up by like 500% in one day and lose everything that you have. So I think the existence of finance is good, and there's a lot of pros to it. But I think if you warp it with our, very classic human flaws, it can quickly turn bad.
Yeah, well said. And maybe I'll add my own answers to the question that I posed myself before Rigel wraps up our conversation here. I think in terms of good, I think finance is a really powerful tool because it can spread opportunity and it can spread resources in ways that there might be no other solution to spreading wealth to people that could otherwise be entirely cut off from opportunities to work and to earn a decent living to provide for their families. And so I think finance provides the mechanisms that have a lot of potential. And I think that's really, and I'll use a simple example. If not for finance, and I use the term generally, but if not for finance utilized, there's a business, Western Union, everyone's probably heard of it. Western Union allows people who have fled their home countries to come to places like Canada to support their family members back home way, way, way more readily and easily than would be the case otherwise. And that's only because Western Union, pursuing profit, has created the infrastructure such that people can earn money here and send it to places of need for their family members. And I see this because I'm, my wife is Colombian. We support people in Colombia. And if we didn't have the ability to send money relatively easily, how much more difficult that would be to provide financial support for people that we love and care for. So I think that's an amazing thing that finance has given us the ability to do, which even 100 years ago was effectively impossible. So that to me is amazing. Tapping into what you guys both sort of hinted at, I think finance can and is easily manipulated for purely money-making purposes, entirely disconnected from what is in fact good for us as individuals and as society as a whole. And that's true of every part of the world of business, I think. But finance, for some reason, seems to be particularly easily manipulated by people that are smart and clever and have tools that the average person can't possibly understand or even have an interest in understanding, and to their detriment. And to reference back to The Big Short and other movies and other pieces of literature and stuff that talk about this, it's very easy to see so many examples where finance was used explicitly as a tool for tricking people, making fools of people, and making money at their expense. And that is the antithesis of living a Christian life, I think. And so finance seems to be particularly easily used by people with those motivations. And I think that's a shame. I know we could talk about a lot of other things related to finance, and we'll probably have to have Braden back for some of those conversations. Maybe one just about, capitalism versus communism, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we should probably leave it there for today. Rigel, I'll turn it over to you to wrap up and lead us in prayer.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you again, Braden, for joining us for another episode. For our listeners out there, if you have any comments, questions, any feedback, we always welcome it. Our email will be in our podcast notes. So feel free to shoot us an email. We'll try our best to read every single one. I'll get us started in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, we thank you for this opportunity to come together and share in our love for you. We thank you for being among us during our discussion. As you say, for where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them. Grant us the strength to go out into the world and live the lessons you reveal to us. We pray especially for Braden and his family. Shower them with blessings and be with them in every step of their life. In Jesus' name we pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Awesome. Thank you, Rigel, for the prayer. You're so much better at praying than I am. You need to write a textbook for me to follow, I think. So thank you for that. Braden, thank you sincerely for taking the time to share your learnings, your expertise, your wisdom with us. Selfishly, we're going to ask you to come back, so I warn you in advance to plan for that at some point. But yeah, thank you for being a part of this little endeavor. Our hope, sincerely, is that someone out there someday will benefit from some of the things that we talk about and share. And if nothing else, hopefully people come to realize that they're not alone if they struggle with navigating their professional lives, especially based upon today's episode. If you work in finance and you're out there and you're trying to be a Christian, you're not the only person that sees conflicts and sees struggles and stuff. The 3 of us, have all obviously lived through that in some way, shape, or form. And so you're not alone. And hopefully this can help you to realize that, at least, and maybe give you some other thoughts. But like Rigel said, please reach out if you've got feedback, if you have questions, and we'll hopefully have other conversations in the future on similar topics of relevance to people navigating faith and finance. So thank you again, Braden. Thank you, Rigel. And thank you, all of you, for tuning in. God bless you, and we'll see you again.
Thanks, guys.